The crew of the schooner A.J. Meerwald set sail for a late afternoon cruise on the lower Delaware Bay in New Jersey. On this trip, along the banks of the Morris River, local painter, artist Glenn Rudderow, his wife, Carol Connor,
Right out on the point.
along with friend and fellow artist Pat Witt, attempt to find the actual location of a long-gone and mostly forgotten lighthouse, the Egg Island Point Lighthouse.
Right there? Yep, that's the mouth of Dividing Creek, and we're somewhere on the line between this buoy and the point. So we're not long out here.
So we're going at the point?
This lighthouse was once a beacon to navigators and local baymen working this part of the Delaware.
What were you saying about your mom and the lighthouse?
Well, her grandfather used to bring her and her family out to the lighthouse on picnics, and they would stop after they'd been crabbing or clamming.
Today, it is but one of the many subjects reflected on the canvases of Glenn Rudderow, which guide us through the region he calls home.
The painting Egg Island came about as probably a response to my mother's death. And as most artists do when someone they're close to passes away, we have a desire to paint a portrait of them, something that says what we feel about them. And it may be a way of closure or healing, something like that. So I'm thinking, well, why don't I memorialize her in a way and tell her story about Egg Island Lighthouse? So that was the first catalyst, the first sense that there might be a story here in this painting. And then came the hard part, was how to do that, because the lighthouse burned down in the late 40s or early 50s, and how to paint this lighthouse that I had never seen presented a challenge to me. So the first thought was, well, I need to see what the lighthouse looked like. And fortunately, there are quite a few old snapshots. My desire was to paint it in a location where my mother and her family would have experienced it in its complete environment. I think that an artist looks inward. In a sense, they're exploring ideas within their mind, how psychologically this image is going to affect people, what is the spirit of the place or the spirit of the past that comes through automatically. And these are inner thoughts that you don't always sense or get when you're on location. Particularly, there's a church in Bivalve called the House of Jacob. But while sitting there painting, you have a sense that things happened there, weddings and funerals. No one's going there. And by being on location and sensing those things, that when I go back to the studio is going to have an effect on how I express this church in a painting or take it further. I think if the Bayshore area, as it changes, it comes to the point where I'm not able to relate to it or express my feelings about it, I would probably move in my mind to other areas or move in my mind to think about it in a different way. An example of that would be in Bivalve. Having grown up in this area, I knew Bivalve 40 years ago when it was quite a different town than it is now in terms of the old oystering business and the old buildings and the older people that lived there. It was a different feeling, and I remember thinking probably for 10 or 15 years that there wasn't anything left in Bivalve that I wanted to paint. It had changed. There were marinas, a lot of weekend boaters that would come down, things like that. A regional painter really paints what they know best because that's where they live. And for me, in painting this area in southern New Jersey, this is my home, this is what I know best, this is what I know more than intimately. If you were traveling all over the country, you would start to lose that sense of familiarity with your subject. It is a relationship that you have with your particular area. And I found that while in traveling, like going to the Catskills painting or to Nova Scotia, there is an excitement to the artist because you're looking at something totally new, but it's very difficult to translate that into the same feeling and spirit that I have when I just go down to the marsh that I've known all my life, and I know where the sun is going to be, I know what the air is going to be like, I know what the bug noises are, or whether the bugs will even be there or not. Those are things that you could only experience if you live and know the place you're working in. I was born in Chicago and raised in southern New Jersey in the Cedarville area. That's where I met Pat Witt while I was in high school. I would study with her at the Barnes Studio of Art. And while studying there, was introduced to two other teachers that I would have when I went to the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. One of them was Morris Blackburn, the other was Lewis Sloan. Pat and I remained friends over all these years, and we still have fun going out to the meadows and down to the bay to paint.
Sometimes I think about the East Point Lighthouse, and I can always remember going there. And I think that's why a lot of painters are attracted to it, that they need to be there for some reason. In fact, when we decide to go out for our picnic supper, we always think, now where are we going to go watch the sunset and full moon? And we always choose East Point. And we sit there and we sketch together, and then we talk about art and about the past. And I can remember Morris Blackburn taking his landscape painting classes there from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. And then it still draws artists all times of the year. Not only artists, painters, but photographers, birders. It's all there. One time when we were down there, this lovely woman came up and started just chatting on about the lighthouse.
I'm born and raised right down there. I live in Leesburg.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and years ago, we used to go all up at the top of that. Nighttime especially. Used to be really spooky like, you know?
Must have seemed like it was haunted.
Yeah, it did. It really did.
Many times when I see Glenn's painting of the East Point Lighthouse in the moonlight or dark night, we have stayed out there that late just to experience that moment. So whenever you look at Glenn's painting of that particular moment that he captured, there's a feeling there. You can look at that painting and hear the sounds of the beginning of night.
When a painter is going to their opening, it's somewhat fearful because you're hoping for success, of course. You're hoping that people will respond favorably to your work and that there will be engaging conversation. And there's also the fear that you're going on stage and that you're exhibiting work that may have taken several years to compile, and people are seeing it for the first time. You're very close to the work because it's been in your studio and in your mind for months, and now you're exposing that to someone else's point of view or someone else's reaction.
Isn't that beautiful?
Oh, I love it. Look at the crescent moon up there.
When morning gilds the sky.
That's wonderful. Next. This one?
Yeah, let's do this one. One of the things that has always fascinated me about going to openings or having people view my paintings that aren't familiar with me or my work is that they will usually bring in a reference to something that they know from a previous experience. For instance, someone might say, oh, that creek is just exactly like the creek that we used to swim in as children.
But where do you see your landscapes from?
These are southern New Jersey.
Oh, I see.
The one on the left is on the Delaware Bay. And fishing house, bait house.
You have a softness to your paintings that, for this kind of realism, is really unusual, I think. And They have really nice soft edges, and it's really quite amazing the way your backgrounds have as much detail in them as the stuff in the foreground.
One of the things that a painter looks forward to at an opening is the response that a person would have in seeing the work and being able to engage in them or connect with them in a way that says, yes, they understood what you were trying to do or what you were trying to say. No, pretty much always done.
Yeah. You teach too, or just
Taught for 17 years at the Pennsylvania Academy.
Ah, terrific.
Then quit.
Then you married me.
Married my love.
In my opinion, what distinguishes his work from other regional landscape painters is the quality of emotion that he brings to the work. It is obvious to me that he is fully invested in an emotional sense in what he is creating. I think that's very evident when you look at the work, and it comes through the work and you feel it yourself as an emotion. Glenn and I understand his passion about painting. I'm a painter too, but in the sense that I pick up paintbrushes and I paint, but it is not the passion of my life. It is not what I need to fulfill my life. For Glenn, it is. Painting is his life. It is what he needs to do on a daily basis.
That's looking good.
Thank you. He understands that I will be spending hours out in the barn every day. He's okay with that. He wants me to be happy. He understands the passion because he has it himself. It's just, it follows a different path. And he comes to horse shows and watches me compete, and he helps me with the video camera. He will tape my rides for me so I can scrutinize my various faults. And he asks every day how my ride went. A little happy today.
Yeah, he looks happy. Crispy.
It's a good balance. I mean, it's a good fit. It'd be great if he could, clean the stalls once in a while, but it's not like I require that of him.
There was a bit of artistic license and invention in figuring out, well, what would the angle or placement of the lighthouse be? How would it be oriented to north, south, east, west? I don't know if the mudflats were directly in front of the lighthouse or adjacent to it or were completely around it. So those were compositional inventions to lead the eye into the painting, have the viewer's eye moving around in the painting. For me, putting a structure into the marsh land or a farm site or having human activity or man's mark on a landscape does have a meaning to the painting. It does affect the meaning of the painting. And it should affect the way the viewer looks at the painting. I know it affects me when I'm out there looking at it in deciding whether to include a building in it or include a person in it. I think that in most instances, a person looking at a painting that sees a man-made structure or man-made alteration to a landscape, they do respond to it in recognition of it, that man has been here, and it does affect the way they think about the painting or respond to the painting because there is a man-made mark there. So for the painter, or for me, in deciding do I include that or not, there's an implication there of what I want the viewer to think. For instance, if there is an old farmhouse in an environment and I include that, then that is saying there is man activity in this location, which is very different than just painting the area by itself. So if I were to approach the painting because I love the particular move of the creek or of a ditch or of a great blue heron or egret or something along the side of the ditch, painting that has a different connotation than including a building or something man-made. Even a road suggests man's activities. I might use the road as a compositional device to pull the viewer into the painting. If you were to ask why does an artist use all the devices that he uses, and why is it important for an artist to have the viewer's eye moving around the canvas in a certain way. The point is that the artist cannot afford the kiss of death to his work. And basically, the kiss of death is the 3-second glance where somebody comes into the studio or they're in a gallery where your work is hanging and they glance at your painting, and then within 3 seconds they've moved on to the next painting. To the artist, it's vitally important to them to capture the viewer's eye and keep it as long as possible. And it's the same as a piece of music. If you turn on a piece of music, you don't want the listener to listen for a few minutes and then get bored with it and turn it off. Well, to the painter, it's the same thing. We want you to look at this painting and be so enveloped by it that you couldn't look at anything else or think about anything else. When you see a painting in a museum that you fall in love with immediately, and you walk into the gallery and that's the one painting you see out of 30 or 40 others, and that's the one painting when you go back to the museum that you have to go back and look at again and spend another hour looking at, and you don't know why. But the reason is the artist is saying something to you through these various devices in the painting, the different colors, the different shapes, the way he's using composition, all these different elements. He's communicating with you, and it holds you there, truly, whether you want to or not. You couldn't say no. It's a magical thing. If you're painting the sunset or the moonrise, one of the greatest compliments a painter can have is for someone to say, I really felt the way the sun was setting. I could see that and I could feel that because I've been there. I know that. Or even in painting a building, an old church or an old barn, when the painter has experienced it firsthand for themselves and have gone there repeatedly and studied it under all the different kinds of lighting and weather conditions, things like that, that translates into the work that he does later. So that could be, I guess, called a technical thing, but it's completely necessary in order to get the spirit of something, to translate it so that other people can look at it. Regardless of what a painter or an artist might say in terms of just working for themselves, that, oh, I just do this for myself, this is my own expression, which is true. The creative person is doing this because they want to, because this is their self-expression. This is going into their inner mind, thinking about their art. It is a very personal, subjective thing. But in the end, the creative person wants someone else to look at it. And hopefully, they will experience what the artist wants them to experience.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very excited tonight. The Society of New Jersey Artists has Glenn Rudderow as our demo.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you to the Society of New Jersey Artists. I have to also recognize one of my first art teachers, Pat Witt, and I'm glad that she's here tonight because I'm going to talk about something that I first learned from her, and then through other teachers, Morris Blackburn and from Louis Sloan. And that's the importance of direct observation, of being out there at the moment, looking at it firsthand. There really can't be any substitute for direct observation from life study.
I started teaching at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in 1963, and I was there for 35 years. Glenn was one of my students. He's a regional painter, and he's captured the essence of South Jersey. I think it is his sense of composition and also his sense of color. I think Glenn's color range has really grown over the years. He can put colors together to create different moods. And I think that's from being out in the field and looking at sunsets over the bay. He could do the same thing if he was an abstract painter. You could look at his pictures and you'd still get a feeling from those patterns of color. So we used, as a realist painter, we used trees and buildings. But I think it goes deeper than that. It's the emotions we get by looking at something. We could pass that tree 1,000 times, and one day we pass it and we see it the way we've never seen it before. And that's what we paint. He loves painting, and it's a part of his life. I think most good artists think alike, even though we work differently. Composition, color, and paint quality. What makes them all different is their own personal way of putting those three things together. He's an excellent artist, I wouldn't say just a good artist. And he's a young artist, so he still has a long way to go.
It's really exciting to be a painter in the sense that you're constantly discovering new things. And as soon as you start to think that you've reached a point in your life, there's something else that's totally new, that you're moving in a new direction. And in a sense, that's a rebirth, that you realize, hey, this isn't the end of the road, it's the beginning of another road. And in that sense, you're always young, or you're young at heart, or as Pat Witt says, young at art. The idea that the painter is a window first struck me when painting farmhouses and other buildings, that a lot of history and a lot of experience goes in and out of a window. And it always seemed to me that there might be a spirit of someone from the past standing on the other side of the window looking out at me as I was looking in at them. And in painting that over and over, I realized that I really was a window myself, in the sense that I'm looking through my experience at something, and whatever the subject is coming back into my mind and being filtered. In a sense, it's a reflection of what I'm looking at. So the windows of the mind, being the eyes, do reflect what's going on in the outside world. The creative person's task is to look at what they're seeing and what they're feeling, and to be able to develop an image inside of their mind and put it out on canvas or paper. One of the exciting things in painting, particularly in the snow, is that white is a clarifying agent, and by painting snow, which is so brilliantly white usually, it clarifies the other colors in the landscape, makes them more vibrant, and it's an excitement or challenge to the artist to be able to put that together. The challenges of painting a winter landscape are pretty obvious. The temperature is cold, and the wind might be howling, might be snowing, and your fingers are numb, your ears are cold, and that's pretty much what you're thinking about, is how cold am I and why am I doing this? But once you get past that, you realize that there's a certain peacefulness and tranquility to winter that none of the other seasons have. And it's a rest period for nature, in that nature hasn't started its rebirth in springtime, and it's past the last of the fall. And by being out there and painting it, you're experiencing that aspect of nature that a lot of people only would think about or see looking out the window. The painting of Egg Island Lighthouse represents to me, of course, the memorial to my mother. My hope as a painter is that the viewer would sense that there is a lighthouse sitting in space here, that it is on the edge of the marsh and the bay, and that there's a lot of light and atmosphere moving around it. The challenge to the painter is to keep the viewer's attention long enough so that they can experience the same things. It was important to me to include my mother's family. It's her grandfather and her uncle and her aunt who raised her, and they are at the lighthouse. My mother is off to the side of the lighthouse. I sense that she was isolated growing up, and that she might sense a certain aloneness. In the placement of my mother, I needed to be able to move the viewer's eye over in that direction, and it seemed to me that a good way to do that would be to put her under the sun, and the reflections of the sunlight would bring more light into that area of the canvas. And in moving across the canvas, I also wanted to include the great blue heron that's on the right side, because to me, a bird flying was a symbol of time moving on. Of course, time has moved on and my mother has passed away, and the stories that she told me are memories, and you have the sense that the blue heron is observing what's going on and of course notices where things are changing and how they're changing. And hopefully as the Delaware Bayshore area changes, it's to our benefit and not to our detriment.